I'm becoming increasingly concerned by the way that Mr. Carney is trying to stitch together a majority government in this country. Once again, to us, whether or not there's a majority government is fundamentally a decision of the Canadian people at the ballot box.
Okay, so NDP interim leader Don Davies is probably not the next floor crosser, but really, these days, who knows? Prime Minister Mark Carney is now attracting both Conservatives and an NDP MP to the Liberal ranks. I'm Catherine Cullen, and this week on the House, who's next? And should the Liberals be wary of the way they're growing their power? First, we'll break it down with a party of two astute political watchers. Then, Government House Leader Stephen McKinnon on what he'd say to Canadians who aren't comfortable with what the Liberals are up to. Plus, for a decade, Jens Stoltenberg led NATO. He joins us for his thoughts on the war with Iran, Russia profiting off the rising price of oil, and whether Donald Trump could still bring down the North Atlantic Military Alliance. Also on the show, we'll look at the deeply controversial bill to combat hate in Canada. Will it help or harm in the wake of the latest attacks on synagogues? But we begin with Mark Carney's plans to build a majority government. The House is now in session. Mark Carney's fourth floor crosser comes as he marks his first full year in power, and in just a few short weeks, he may have a majority government. At the same time, Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre is off on another trip, this time to the United States, trying to show off his statesman-like chops. So, 1 year in, how's it going? Should we be surprised by all that's transpired? Well, how about a surprise party? House party, that is. We're back again with the team from our election podcast to break it all down. Danielle Thibault is the bureau chief for Radio-Canada in Ottawa and host of Les Coulisses du Pouvoir. Jason Markisoff is a producer and writer for CBC Calgary, focusing on the West. Hey, guys, it's so good to see you.
Hey, good to be back.
Party time. Dan, I am going to start with you to talk about Laurie Idlow crossing the floor. The fourth floor crosser Carney has secured in less than 4 months. It's unusual to see so many people crossing the floor. Like, how wild is it really?
It's impressive because it's so many in such a short period of time. I looked back in history. I mean, floor crossers have always existed. There's been some with government. There's been some going to opposition. Trudeau lost Leonard Leslev to the Conservatives.
Indeed.
Back when he was in power. And so there's been a period where it was much bigger than what we've seen. It's just that in this particular case, it's this guy who showed up and picked up a party that was not supposed to win, and then won a minority government and is building slowly a majority with people he's picking from other parties in a very short period of time. And I think that's what strikes the imagination when you look at it. It's the pace and the impact it's going to have on the government.
Jason, the impact it's going to have on the government, there's something interesting about who is crossing too, because I think there was this understanding, Conservatives are moving over because Mark Carney is more to the center or to the right than Justin Trudeau, but now he's picked up a member of the NDP. What do you make of Mark Carney's reach?
This isn't the only NDP he's picked up, too. Remember, one of his candidates in the Scarborough by-election is the former deputy leader of the Ontario NDP. And what's fascinating about his rise of his current standing right now is that not only is it kind of cross-ideological, his ability to attract people, but also cross-country. Geographically, it's impressive. The polls, how well he's doing in Quebec, how well he's doing in Atlantic Canada. He's brought the Liberals closer than they ever have been in a long, long time in Alberta. So why is this happening? It's kind of baffling that 2 months on, we're still talking about the Davos speech. I mean, to be talking this long about the impact of a international affairs speech that wasn't a gaffe is quite remarkable. And the other part of that, though, is also the Donald Trump effect. I mean, toward the end of last year, Donald Trump seemed to be not as much of a factor. Affordability became a big issue. The Conservatives were edging up. This year, it's been Trump. So people are going to this person who, 1 year on is as or more trusted than he was when he first came on the scene.
Does that come with a risk, Catherine? You've talked to some libs. I mean, floor crossing is perceived in a certain way by the public and other parties. What's the risk for the Liberals here?
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously a cost-benefit analysis in the sense that the potential benefit here is a majority government, and that's
obviously
a pretty big upside. But the risk is that there are a certain tranche of people who really are not on side with this idea of floor crossing. Suggestion, certainly something the NDP has talked a lot about, that people should have to go to a by-election. They should have to put it to the public. Of course, this is how the system works. It allows for this, but that doesn't mean it sits well with everybody. And I do think, you know, there is a sort of longer term question about the prospect of this seeming like a power grab and being a little bit offside with folks. At the same time, as the audience is going to hear in just a few minutes, we sat down with Stephen McKinnon, who I know you talked to this week too, Dan, the government House leader, who suggests, like, listen, this sort of fits the moment. It fits where Canadians are at, where they're at, what the polls are showing. I always, it puts a twinkle in my eye when a politician talks about the polls, because usually what's the old line? Polls are for dogs. They're not so interested. But right now, the Liberal Party liking what they see in the polls and sort of the public consensus, and feeling like the upside and the public mood outweighs any potential downside.
No, I'm jealous. I don't get to talk to Steve McKinnon this weekend. but Dan, last time I saw you, we were both in Calgary at the Conservative Convention.
Indeed.
And actually you were there too, Catherine. But you know, when we were there, it seemed like Conservatives were like watching the skies, and not just for Generu, but to see what kind of other person would leave. What are you hearing in Ottawa from your sources? Should we expect more of those?
It's interesting. Yeah, it's interesting because after the first one, I remember talking to Conservatives who were openly saying, and Gérard Deltel from the Quebec region actually said it in an interview, it's over, it's done, it's not going to be any more. And then there were two more. And so now they're not saying that anymore, and I won't say there's not going to be another one, because it feels like the government is still, I want to say, on the hunt, but they're still going around the hallways of Parliament, looking at other people from other parties, maybe feeling a little lonely, seeing if they would feel like coming over to their side. And McKinnon, and I don't know if it was the case in your interview, Catherine, but when I sat down with him, he openly said, you know, I'm talking to whoever wants to talk, and I think I'm willing.
Yes.
And he hinted that he was entertaining some kind of conversation, a bit of a level of conversation with some people.
Jason, the NDP in all of this, now down to just 6 MPs, still waiting to elect their next leader. How bad is this for the NDP?
Was our friends at Politico said that the party had gone from being able to fit its whole caucus into a minivan into now a station wagon. And if Alexandre Boulay-Rees leaves in Quebec to run provincially, could be a sedan. It's tough. It's rough. And I think more than just like losing the numbers, because 7 to 6 is not a huge number. It's like losing the geographical absence. Like much of that map, NDP's been blotted off. They already lost Ontario entirely, lost Atlantic Canada entirely. Now they have lost anything north of like Edmonton. They're mostly just down by the border. All they have left but Manitoba, 1 seat in Alberta, and a few in BC. That's tough. Now you'd think, because Carney seems to be appealing as a progressive conservative prime minister, that there's room on the center left for the NDP to peel off votes. But if it seems like the front-runner status of Villiers becomes cemented, they're going to be moving to a narrower band of the left, hoping that larger platform, that more urgent platform, appeals to people. But that just could potentially allow Carney to peel off more people from the broad center.
Okay. This is House Party, and you got to have a little fun at a party. So we're going to try that. This week marks 1 full year since Mark Carney became Prime Minister. Have a listen to this clip from our friends over at This Hour Has 22 Minutes, where Pierre Poilievre, played by Chris Wilson, crosses the floor, and Mark Carney, played by Mark McKinney, explains how to be a liberal.
This feels superficial.
No, it's not. I'm a liberal. See? Got the socks.
We don't do that anymore. Show them. Black sock, Navy? This is Parliament, not the Ottawa Blues Fest. Get out. Pierre, I think we should recap the rules.
Right, sorry.
1, don't interrupt Daddy. 2, Carney equals Daddy. 3, just have fun. What? No, that's the old guy.
It's funny, Dan. Is it a fair portrayal of the Prime Minister?
I don't know. I mean, it kind of encapsulates all the little bits and pieces of stereotypes we hear about Mark Carney around the Parliament Hill. I'm sure some of that stuff comes from something real. Some other stuff, it's probably people just exaggerating.
We all know no brown shoes.
No brown shoes. In fact, every morning when I put on a pair of brown shoes, I'm thinking, if I see the Prime Minister
today, what's he going to think of you?
He's I know what he's going to think. So it's fun. Is it a fair portrayal? I don't know, but it comes from somewhere usually.
Yeah.
I mean, Catherine, you were on the plane traveling with the Prime Minister to India, Australia, and Japan, and I'm guessing you didn't hear anybody call him Daddy. But what did you? But maybe you did. But what did you observe there?
I have to say, just as a general premise, that whole calling politicians daddy thing really, it grosses me out. No, I did not. I'd still be recovering. It was a fascinating trip. A few things stood out. I guess that clip sort of gets at the joke about him being humorless or very determined. It was striking being on the same plane as him. The journalists are at the back, Prime Minister's at the front. We don't see a lot of him while we're traveling. You know this, Dan. But he works incessantly. Like, these flights are sometimes happening at really odd hours, and we are trying to sleep, and he is still up there getting briefed. Sometimes it's like a 10-hour flight, and from what we hear, he has been working nonstop the whole time. No in-flight movies from Mark Carney. You do get the sense that he is an exceptionally demanding boss, which is where I think some of that humor comes from. And the other thing I will say is that the world leaders he met were really enthusiastic about meeting with him. I think some of that is a bounce from that Davos speech you were talking about before, Jason. Some of it his CV as a central banker, and some of it is just about Canada. The other big takeaway for me was how hungry all the countries were for Canadian energy, and that put some pressure on the Prime Minister and the Liberal government to deliver in terms of the infrastructure of actually being able to get more of this energy out of Canada.
And what comes out of the deal with Alberta, that's coming up fast. We're going to need to get some real stuff coming from there. Jason, we talked about that in House Party before, how Mark Carney was not a politician, right? But he's doing pretty well nationally, but he's doing pretty well in Alberta. Is he better at that politic thing that people thought he would be?
I feel like that's one of the most defining things about this. I mean, I remember when the Conservatives seemed so excited, licking their chops at taking on this former central banker who was a neophyte to politics. We've seen past politicians come from outside falling flat, like Michael Ignatieff, the former Liberal leader. Jim Prentice had a very, very short period as premier before he lost. I think people thought that this kind of a bit more stiff wooden figure would not be good, but it seemed like that was the person that Canada wanted at this moment of taking on this existential threat from Donald Trump. And over the time, he's so far, in 1 year in, he seems like he's fulfilling that promise. Whether it sticks is going to be interesting. I mean, with a bigger caucus becomes, more caucus management may have to be done. And, we saw a little sign this week of several MPs voting with the NDP on an arms control bill. So, we'll see there are, other measures, other challenges for him to come. But so far, the polls and the magnitude he's able to be for other MPs shows that he's better in politics than almost anybody expected him to be.
Yeah.
Okay, we have just a moment left here. I do want to talk about Pierre Poilievre's trip, so we're going to try to do some quick answers here. Dan, in the past, Pierre Poilievre has really focused on domestic issues. That was part of his pitch. He criticized Carney's trips abroad. Why do you think we see him traveling more lately?
Because he sees what impact Carney traveling has on Canadians. When you look at the polls, most Canadians are pretty comfortable with seeing the Prime Minister going abroad, looking at new markets, new business partner. And I think he's finally realizing that Pierre Poilievre needs to send that message to Canadians. If he wants to be Prime Minister at some point, he needs to behave like one. Chantal Hébert told me many times, when you audition for the job of leader of the opposition, you usually get that. And so I think he's learning that he needs to project himself somewhere else. He should have done that much earlier, I believe. The speech on the road is still needs to be adjusted. I think it sounds a lot like the stuff we hear from him here in Canada, but at least he's going abroad, he's going somewhere, and he's meeting with people, and he's showing that he can do that, and that's a very different side of him.
Jason? Carney on the cusp, perhaps, of a majority government, depending on the outcome of these by-elections. If you are Pierre Poilievre, is it a good thing or a bad thing that there might not be an election in the immediate future?
with the party a dozen points down now, it's a good thing. It gives him time to broaden that appeal to Canadians. He seems like he hasn't been landing like he was before when Trudeau was. To figure out his attack against Carney, and maybe, hopefully, if you're a Conservative, that Carney falls in some way like they had long hoped he would.
I guess, though, the flip side of that is whether Pierre Poilievre feels that he can hang on as leader over the next 3 years if the Conservatives are still struggling in the polls. But hey, we can talk about that the next time we have a party.
Sounds good.
All right.
Thank you, guys. Thanks for making the time.
Anytime. Take care.
Danielle Thibault and Jason Markusoff. The Conservatives are certainly not applauding Mark Carney's success with floor crossers. In fact, they've accused the Prime Minister of resorting to backroom deals to get a majority. So, how does the government justify these moves? I spoke to Government House Leader and Transport Minister Stephen McKinnon in his office on Parliament Hill on Thursday. Stephen McKinnon, welcome back to the House.
It's great to be here.
So, 4 floor crossers now, majority government in sight. You spiking the football?
Not at all. We have a minority parliament. I wake up every day, walk into the Government House Leader's office and work with my colleagues across the aisle to help move solutions forward for Canadians. And happily, I'm proud to report that, we've seen some progress in recent weeks.
Well, when it comes to floor crossers and Lori Idlout, this was, a surprise but not a shock, given that we knew she had been entertaining the idea. I wonder if you can just help us understand this a little bit better. How long have you, the Liberals, been trying to convince Ms. Idlout to cross the floor?
Well, first of all, I think this is a story of her constituents being very persuasive and compelling. When the people of Nunavut, who have, let's acknowledge, a number of critical challenges, housing, nutrition, transportation, I know that firsthand, and see an agenda very, very focused on the North, on the Arctic, on Arctic sovereignty, and on solving problems. I think in her case, she felt very, very compelled to be part of the solution, to join a government that was focused on addressing issues directly relevant to her constituency and not having to cross the aisle every time she wanted to weigh in on a particular issue.
You say very, very focused on the North. It was only in November, when the Liberal budget came out, that she said of your government that your decisions were having, quote, a devastating political impact, that children in Nunavut, according to her, reportedly stealing from grocery stores because they are so hungry. She said, yet your government, and of course she's now a member of your party, was subsidizing mining companies to make it easier for them to exploit Indigenous peoples' lands. For someone to offer such a devastating critique and join your party 4 months later, do you see how this could make people feel pretty cynical about politics?
Well, look, there's a lot there. There are some things that many of your listeners and I and you, we must acknowledge that it is a very difficult situation in Northern Canada and some communities with respect to the logistics of food distribution, of basic infrastructure. It's very expensive to build in the North, but Prime Minister Carney has resolved, and in fact was there on Thursday, to announce major investments, dual-use investments. Dual-use meaning we will be investing in our military, yes, in Arctic sovereignty, yes, but we will also be investing in communities and community needs. I think any member of Parliament, when they see a difficult situation with respect to nutrition or poverty in their ridings, they have emotional reactions. I certainly think that's the case, that has been the case for Ms. Idlout. It's the case for all of us. When we see needs that are perhaps going unaddressed, we want them addressed. We want to reach out and find solutions. And I think Ms. Idlout realized that those solutions can be found within the government ranks.
Her crossing the floor puts you on the path to a majority government, depending on how these by-elections work out. Now, I understand that the rules absolutely allow for floor crossing, but what do you say to Canadians who find particularly the possibility of a majority government this way to be distasteful, shady, that you are not really respecting the spirit of the elections, even if the rules are being followed?
Well, let's remember that these are very, very difficult personal decisions that members of Parliament make. And I look at, a couple of the Conservative members that have joined the government caucus. These are lifelong Conservatives. These are people that have been involved in provincial politics and what does that mean? Well, I mean, I've been involved in provincial politics. That means you have relationships and riding associations and, $10 spaghetti dinner fundraisers going back years and even in some cases decades. These are incredibly wrenching decisions for a member of parliament, and I don't think we should just dismiss them cynically. Because, and here's why, Catherine, Canadians in Conservative ridings are sending a message. Whether you find that message in opinion polling, whether you find that message in the letters to the editor of a local paper on the prairies, these Canadians are saying the times are serious. They require serious government, a serious strategy, and more than just sloganeering and repeating the same question in the House of Commons, which we see every day.
And yet, how many times?
These Canadians are making those views known to their Conservative MPs. How do I know this? Because they tell me that. They're quite open about that in the halls of Parliament. And I think that what you're seeing is, and we've seen before with Conservatives, there are basic fault lines in that party. And some people who fall on the more centrist side of those fault lines are seeing a lot to like in the Liberal Party right now.
What I wanted to say was, how many times do we hear from governments a dismissal of opinion polls? So to hear you cite that as a reason that it's acceptable to get a majority government this way, I'm trying to compute that.
No, that's not what I said. What I said was that in those Conservative ridings, with those Conservative members of Parliament, they're consulting with their constituents, perhaps more than most, and hearing this message back. Serious solutions, a serious strategy for our country. Many Canadians are responding to that in various ways. They're writing letters to newspapers, they're making their opinions known online, and they're especially making those views known to their Conservative member of Parliament.
Now, I know you're not going to give me names here, so I'm not going to ask you who else might cross the floor, but you have suggested that there might be more folks out there who are ready to make moves. How many folks are we talking about?
Well, I don't want to characterize that because, there are a fairly large number of Conservative MPs who are currently dissatisfied with the way their party is positioned on a number of issues in the country. And they fall on that side of the fault line that I just described. There are a great number of those. But those who are willing to make that intensely personal decision that I also described, that's harder to define.
But there are still a few more members of Parliament who you believe might cross over to the Liberal Party, specifically from the Conservative Party?
What I can say is that there are a large number of Conservative members of Parliament who are being told by their constituents that they like what this government's doing and are looking longingly across the aisle.
Okay, we're going to leave it there. Thank you for welcoming us to your office, Stephen McKinnon.
Thank you.
Government House Leader Stephen McKinnon. Still to come on the House podcast, former NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg on how Russia is benefiting from the war in Iran and whether NATO can survive the second Trump presidency. That's coming up just after this. I'm Catherine Cullen. You're listening to The House, making politics make sense. Make sure to give us a follow so you never miss an episode, and tell us what you think of the show. You can email us at thehouse@cbc.ca. The war in the Middle East enters its third week and the devastation continues to mount. Millions of people have been displaced and the world is facing the largest supply disruption in the history of the global oil market. Meanwhile, the Prime Minister is visiting Norway and the United Kingdom, where Arctic security is a major topic. What can Canada and its allies do to try to bring some calm at this time of international upheaval? And how concerned should we be that Russia is profiting from the instability? Jens Stoltenberg was the Secretary General of NATO from 2014 to 2024. He's now Norway's finance minister. We spoke Friday morning. Welcome to the House.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you for coming on. Minister, as I said, you were the Secretary General of NATO, notably during another pivotal moment in 2022, Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. When you look at this moment now with Iran, what worries you most about what we're seeing in the Middle East?
It's of course the combination of the fact that we have a war which is not only about Iran but also involving a lot of countries in the region and the economic consequences, because no one can say with certainty how severe their economic consequences will be. That depends on how long this war will last. But already now, after 2 weeks of war, we see that the economic consequences are significant. Increased energy prices, and that can lead to reduced global growth and increased inflation. So it's a combination of the human suffering, the war, with the economic consequences, which is making me, of course, concerned.
Do you think NATO countries are going to be pulled into this conflict?
I don't think so, and I think it's important to prevent NATO from becoming involved. NATO has never played any important role in the traditional Middle East conflicts. NATO has had some presence in Iraq to help to train Iraqi soldiers to ensure that ISIS does not return. Turkey, which is of course bordering the region, is a NATO ally. But beyond that, NATO as an institution, NATO as an alliance have never played any important role, despite the fact that individual NATO allies like the United States, to some extent also the United Kingdom, France, have played a role. So I don't think, and I don't hope, and I think it's important to prevent NATO to be involved in the conflict.
Important to stay out of it. I do want to ask you, you talked about the economic consequences, about oil specifically. Norway is an oil-producing nation like Canada. The effective closure of the Strait of Hormuz has dramatically driven up prices. There are worries about another energy crisis. To what extent can countries like Norway and Canada do anything to prevent that?
I cannot speak on behalf of Canada, but I can speak on behalf of Norway. And of course, Norway is a major oil and gas producer, and we have already been asked to look into whether we can increase our production to substitute some of the volumes which are now not coming out of the Middle East because of the war. The reality is that the Norwegian oil companies, or the companies that are operating on the Norwegian continental shelf, they produce at full capacity. So it's very limited what they can do to add more volumes. But I think it underlines the importance of oil and gas production coming from democratic countries like Canada, like Norway, to at least reduce the dependency on energy from the Middle East and from Russia. And of course, in the long run, we can invest, but that will take time, and it cannot address the, as I say, immediate need for increased volumes.
Well, and right now, Russia does appear to already be profiting off this. One think tank estimated that they have brought in 6 billion euros selling their oil. That's almost $10 billion Canadian. And now President Trump has provided temporary authorization to purchase Russian oil that is trapped at sea. How much should the West be worried about Russia growing stronger, growing wealthier in the midst of this conflict?
There are many reasons to be worried about the war in the Middle East. It's the human suffering, it's the economic consequences. But a third reason to be concerned about the war in the Middle East is that it actually can help Russia. It can help Russia at least in two ways. Partly the fact that the oil prices are going up. Russia is a major oil producer, and there has also been all the announcements about reducing at least some of the sanctions on Russia, and that will help them further. And then the other way that the war in the Middle East against Iran can help Russia is, of course, that the air defense capabilities, the interceptors, which are so critical, important for Ukraine, they are now delivered to the Middle East and used there to protect against Iranian attacks. And there is a risk that that will reduce the supply of these systems, especially the advanced air defense systems, to Ukraine. So that's the third reason to be concerned, is that it actually also can have a negative impact on Ukraine. And of course, I regret that very much.
Okay, so the oil, the air defense systems, broadly, how much can allies really do about that?
Well, so first of all, most allies are not involved in the war in the Middle East at all. So, of course, they should continue to provide whatever they can to help the Ukrainians. And we should continue to finance the Ukrainians, partly to help them to purchase weapons, especially air defense, including from the United States. But I think the best investment we can do, and we are doing that, is to help the Ukrainians to build their own capabilities. And Ukraine has proven extremely efficient in ramping up production. At the beginning of the war, they hardly produced any drones. Now they produce millions of drones, so we can help them investing more.
As I said, part of the reason we're talking is because Prime Minister Carney is visiting Norway, and this is part of a broader tour of the globe he's been doing, talking about his vision for a sort of new global order, middle powers working together to prevent essentially being eaten by hegemons like the United States and China. What more can countries, or should countries like Canada and Norway be doing at this moment? I mean, you've talked already in this conversation about NATO staying out of it when it comes to the Middle East. Should there be more speaking out in the face of this conflict? What does it look like?
So first, I think it's very important the fact that Prime Minister Carney visits Norway. For Norway, that's a recognition of the unique partnership, friendship we have. Two Arctic nations, two NATO allies, of course different in many ways, but also a lot of similarities in the high north, energy producers and open democratic societies, which shares many of the same values. We can work together on issues like industry, defense, but also coordinate our political voice. For instance, when it comes to sending a clear message that we want a rules-based order. We realize that it's very much under pressure, but we need to work together and try to strengthen those countries which believe in the same values as Canada and Norway do.
Saying you want a rules-based order, how does that coincide with this moment? Does that mean saying to allies like the United States that attacking Iran was a violation of international law?
Yes, and that has been Norway's position. We have stated that the attack has been or is against international law. No one, of course, supports the regime in Tehran, but at the same time, to use military force the way we have seen against Iran is a violation of international law, and the Norwegian Prime Minister has stated that clearly. Then, as Prime Minister Carney stated, for instance, in his speech in Davos, we have never lived in a totally rules-based order. There have been violations, there have been many actions which have violated the kind of idea of a predictable, fair, rules-based order. But we need to strive to prevent a world where it's absolutely only might that so gives right, and therefore we need to continue to work together as like-minded countries as Canada and Norway are.
How does Arctic security fit into this then? Because the Prime Minister, before arriving in Norway, laid out a plan to spend tens of billions of dollars improving, spending more on the military and other things in Canada's Arctic. How crucial is that at this moment?
Arctic security is crucial. I remember when I was Prime Minister of Norway more than 10 years ago, we used to say that in the high north we have low tensions. That's not so, correct anymore, because we have seen over time a significant Russian military buildup in the high north. There are increased tensions, and therefore it is even more important that we work together as NATO allies, and that we also see how we can develop our bilateral cooperation. Prime Minister Carney is now participating in a NATO exercise in northern Norway. One example of how we can exercise together soldiers, personnel from Canada with personnel from Norway and other NATO allies.
In closing, I do want to ask you, you worked with President Trump closely when you were NATO Secretary General, and you said you feared he was going to pull out of NATO, that the alliance would crumble. In the end, he has pushed members to meet their NATO spending pledges and go beyond. He's also arguably the biggest disruptor of global stability at this moment. Do you still worry whether NATO can survive Donald Trump?
We don't have any guarantees, but I believe that NATO, the North Atlantic Alliance, will survive, will prevail, despite the difficulties, the disagreements, and the crisis we face. And I believe that partly because, of course, a strong NATO is good for Europe, it's good for Canada, but it's also good for the United States.
Do you think he believes that?
Well, I think that he understands that, of course, the US is big, 25% of the world's economic might, or world or global GDP. But together with NATO allies, Canada and the Europeans, we are 50% of the world's GDP and 50% of the world's military might. So therefore, we are stronger, and also the US is safer. And I met President Trump last year, and together with the Norwegian Prime Minister, and we spent some time explaining to him that Arctic security, of course, matters for the United States. And a small NATO ally like Norway, even more so, of course, Canada, we are important for US security. Norway has a border with Russia. On the other side of that border, land border, we see the largest concentration of nuclear weapons in the world. Missiles, submarines, strategic bombers, and these weapons, these nuclear weapons, are not directed against Norway, just on the other side of the border. They are mainly directed against the United States, because the shortest route from northern Russia to US is not via Europe, it's just over the North Pole, the Arctic. And therefore we help them to track the submarines, we help them to provide early warning, we help them to get the critical information for their own security. And Sweden, Finland, other countries which are close to Russia up in the north, and of course also Canada, are important just because of geography for US security. So the criticism that President Trump has expressed has primarily not been against NATO. It has been against NATO allies not investing enough in NATO. And the good news is that that has changed and is changing, meaning that Canada, Europe are investing much more in defense. And I think that's the best thing we can do to preserve the alliance between North America and Europe.
Jens Stoltenberg, I appreciate your thoughts today. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Jens Stoltenberg is the former Secretary General of NATO.
We are shaken to our core at this moment. This is the third shooting of a synagogue in a 5-day period.
Sarah Lefton is speaking in front of a Toronto synagogue that was shot at last Saturday night. Fears that the Jewish community is being targeted were already high after the Israel-Hamas war. Now, those fears are surging again.
When we look at the trajectory over the last couple of years, it's exactly what we should have known was coming. We've seen hateful words go unchecked in our streets. We've seen hateful protests and rallies, not just taking place downtown Toronto, but taking place in Jewish residential areas.
And there's renewed pressure for the federal government to crack down on hate crimes. In the last 2 years, a Jewish girls' school in Toronto was shot at 3 times, and there have been arson attacks and vandalism at synagogues in cities across Canada. Over that time, Muslim worshippers have also reported attacks and vandalism. But a big piece of how the Liberals plan to address growing hate, a bill known as C9, has been controversial.
The Prime Minister is more worried about protecting turkeys from hunters than he is about protecting synagogues from terrorists, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, we, on this side of the House, we want to protect synagogues. We want to protect community centers. We want to protect places of worship, which is why C9 is before this House today.
C9, the Combating Hate Act, has faced criticism since it was first introduced last September. So what's in the bill? First, the government wants to make it a crime for anyone to intimidate and obstruct people from entering spaces, including places of worship, schools, and community centers. The bill also makes it a crime to promote hate by displaying certain terrorism or hate symbols, like the Hamas flag. And it creates a new, specific hate crime offense. Currently, hate isn't a crime on its own. It's an aggravating factor, something that could lead to a stiffer sentence if it played a role in, say, arson or assault. Here's Justice Minister Sean Fraser introducing the bill last year.
I believe in a Canada where we will read about hate crimes not in our newspapers, but in our history books. It is only when people have the ability to live freely, to practice their faith, to be with the person who they love, to be included regardless of the immutable characteristics with which we are born, that we will have achieved freedom for all. That is the great promise of this country.
The Center for Israel and Jewish Affairs is one of the prominent Jewish organizations that largely supports this bill. Noah Shack is the CEO. I asked him to what extent he felt the Combating Hate Act would make his community safer.
Well, I think there's a number of ways that this initiative helps. First, goes to the very fact that it was prioritized among the first pieces of legislation to be introduced in this session of Parliament. That sends a signal that this is not some problem for some group of people somewhere in this country, but actually needs to be a national priority in dealing with. And I think that alone is an important signal. In terms of the substance of the bill, there are a number of provisions that will reinforce the imperative for law enforcement to protect places of worship, prioritize action against harassment and intimidation and obstruction of people trying to go about their daily lives, whether in the Jewish community or other communities, and unfortunately are being intercepted and harassed. Having a standalone hate crime provision will mean that the offense itself will be considered in the bail hearing, and repeat offenders will be held to a standard befitting their actions. And I think that really does help move things forward in a tangible and material way.
How urgent is it to get a law passed to try to address the issues in the Combating Hate Act?
When we're dealing with this epidemic of hate that our community has been experiencing, escalating over the last 2 years, it's important that we move with urgency on all measures to protect us. We're very concerned not just about the fear of what could happen. We're concerned about what we have seen take place in other jurisdictions similar to our own, in the UK, in the US, in Australia, where people have been killed. And we need to do everything possible to prevent that from happening here. This is an important step forward in that regard.
That sentiment, doing everything to prevent hate in Canada, is echoed widely, but hundreds of organizations worry that this bill still misses the mark. Muslim, Christian, Sikh organizations, some 2S LGBTQ+ groups, and civil liberties associations have all called for changes.
Is C9 bringing forward a solution that will be helpful to communities, or is it yet again, a punitive solution that will...
Anaïs Bussière-McNichol is with the Canadian Civil Liberties Association.
Obviously, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, and racism are on the rise, and communities across the country are worried, and they do deserve protection. The reality is that criminal law is already used to combat hatred, so the police can and should intervene when individuals, including protesters, go too far and become violent or incite violence. The reaction from civil society when Bill C9 was tabled was that, while criminal law is not the solution to every social issue, and that when you take a closer look to the new provisions included in Bill C9, there was a very real risk that it would end up criminalizing peaceful protesters and disproportionately harming marginalized groups that are already over-surveilled.
So the bill was already contentious, but late last year, the heat ratcheted way up when the government proposed a change to the bill to get buy-in from the Bloc Québécois. The controversy? Right now, hate speech laws make an exception for when people are expressing a religious belief. This plan would end that religious protection. That lit a fire under some parliamentarians and faith groups. Conservatives said it would criminalize religious scripture. Here's MP Dave Epp in the House.
For decades, the criminal code has protected those who express, and this is important, in good faith, an opinion based on a belief in a religious text. This wasn't some loophole. The Supreme Court recognized that the defense is the constitutional necessity. It was the bridge that allowed our hate speech laws to coexist with the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Bill C9 seeks to dynamite that bridge.
The Conservatives tried to block the move. They filibustered one marathon meeting that ran for 9 hours until after midnight, and it got tense.
Mr. Giovanni called a member of Parliament a hypocrite. He did not, and I'm moving on to the next speaker, which is Mr. Lawrence.
I was also going to call the Liberal Party a party of colonizers and imperialists. So just to add that to
the speakers list later on. It's
sure,
late
please
in the
add me
evening.
to the
We're
list.
not going to tolerate that type of behavior. Mr. Lawrence, please.
I wish to confirm Mr. Giovanni's comment that the Bloc are hypocrites.
All right, we'll move on. We can do this all night if you want.
Those MPs say they all heard from thousands of constituents on this change. The Liberals have tried to address the concern, adding language they say makes it clear that reading a religious text on its own can't be considered hate speech. But the concerns persist. Mustafa Farouk is a lawyer and the former CEO of the National Council of Canadian Muslims. I asked him why, despite the changes, he believes the legislation still has fundamental flaws.
The real problem that we foresee is a potential chilling effect, where you might have people who are reading the Bible, Quran, Torah in good faith and are trying to read religious texts, but now have to look over their shoulder to wonder about whether they might be criminalized for reading certain verses. And this is not a hypothetical kind of conversation. In fact, we've seen folks like, now Minister Miller state that, he finds certain verses of the Bible to be hateful. And if they're said in public, in certain contexts, those certain contexts perhaps have not been fully explained, that those might lead to charges, or maybe should lead to charges.
At committee, the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Justice moved an amendment that the Liberals say will protect good faith religious expressions. How far does this go towards resolving your concerns?
So I think it does, take a very positive step. It makes it more clear that, if you're communicating on a statement on a matter of public interest, including an educational, religious, political, or scientific statement, that those aren't meant to be captured, as long as they, quote, don't willfully promote hatred against an identifiable group by communicating the statement. So I think it takes a step forward, but I think critics have suggested that latter portion of, if they're not attempting to willfully promote hatred, could be argued as sort of a circular amendment. And that doesn't really provide clarity to anybody. Now, of course, the government might say in response, well, the charter is the backstop. There's a constitutional protection that's available for everyone to say that if you're reading the Bible or the Quran and the Torah, you can never be charged because the charter protects, freedom of faith and freedom of religion, etc. My counter to that would sort of very simply be that would require people to get charged and then go to court, and you'd have to hire annoying lawyers like myself. That doesn't seem like very much fun. And it doesn't seem to diminish any of the kinds of concerns around the chilling effect that we might see until this matter is clarified before the courts.
We focused in on the religious exemption here, but I'd like to zoom out for a moment and ask you, writ large, how do you feel about this piece of legislation?
I think there are some parts of it that are good. Things like the freestanding provision on hate, I think, is a positive step forward. But the rest of it, I question its utility as to will this actually help in challenging hate? I've been involved in burying, members of the Canadian community who were killed because of hate. I was involved in the funerals of the Afzal family that was run down in London, Ontario, whose only crime was being Muslim. I don't necessarily see anything in C9 that would address the underlying root causes of what led there, nor do I see anything that would help prevent things like that in the future.
This legislation is moving ahead. We're still waiting to see exactly what changes the House of Commons accepts. But right now it seems unlikely that any version of the Combating Hate Act will sit well with its many critics. That's it for us this week. Our crew on the House is Kristen Everson, Selma Ibrahim, Benjamin Lopez-Steven, and our senior producer is Jennifer Chevalier. Technical production by Miguel Plant. I'm Catherine Cullen. Thank you so much for listening.